Imagine looking at your tax return this year, right? You see that you made billions of dollars in wealth, and then you just legally pay $0 in federal income tax.
Which is just wild to even think about.
It is. And then imagine the government actually sends you a $4,000 child tax credit, basically treating you as if you were, living below the poverty line.
Yeah, like you need the financial help.
Exactly. It sounds like this totally absurd hypothetical, but I mean, for Jeff Bezos in the early 2010s, that was an actual documented reality.
It really shatters this fundamental assumption we all kind of carry around.
Yeah.
We operate in a society built on the expectation of a perfectly balanced scale.
Yeah.
You put in a pound of hard work, you get out a pound of reward.
Right.
But the moment you peek behind the curtain of global economic structures, you realize that scale isn't just imbalanced. It is completely engineered to operate on a different set of physics entirely.
Welcome to your custom deep dive. Today, we're taking a massive stack of sources. We've got philosophical critiques of meritocracy, academic sociological papers, these deep financial analyses of Warren Buffett, and yeah, those leaked ProPublica IRS tax files we just mentioned.
It's a really heavy stack today.
It really is. Our mission is to uncover the true mechanics of extreme wealth, dissect the myth of meritocracy versus luck, and figure out how these massive hidden structures actually shape your personal life story. Okay, let's unpack this. Starting right at the bedrock of the American dream.
The idea that hard work equals success.
Exactly. We are taught from day one that wealth is the result of pure merit. But before we even look at how billionaires operate, we have to look at the mathematical foundation of success. And science is telling a story that makes a lot of people really uncomfortable.
Yeah, it really does. The PBS NewsHour analysis covers this fascinating study by some Italian physicists and economists. They actually tackled this mathematically. They wanted to know if the distribution of wealth, matches the distribution of human talent.
Okay, so how do you even measure that?
So they created a computer simulation. They built this virtual world with agents and assigned each agent a talent score. And they mapped this talent on a standard bell curve. So most people were average, a few below average, and a few were highly talented.
Which mirrors reality, right? I mean, the smartest person in the world is maybe 2 or 3 times smarter than average. They aren't like a billion times smarter. Human traits have ceilings.
Precisely. They have hard limits. So the researchers let these agents interact over a simulated 40-year career. And throughout this career, the agents would randomly encounter lucky events.
Randomly?
Completely randomly. And if their talent score was high enough, a lucky event would double their wealth. But they also encountered unlucky events, which would cut their wealth in half, regardless of how talented they were.
I want to make sure I'm picturing this right. The luck is just sweeping across the board randomly, hitting people no matter their initial talent score.
Yep. Just totally random strikes of luck or bad luck. And the simulation proved that the wealthiest agents at the end of the 40 years were almost never the most talented ones.
Wait, really? Never?
Almost never. They were usually the agents with just average talent who happened to get hit by an overwhelming sequence of lucky events. The researchers mathematically demonstrated that while talent is on a bell curve, wealth follows a Pareto distribution.
A power law.
Right, a power law, where a tiny fraction holds the vast majority of resources. And the only variable capable of bridging that gap between a capped bell curve of talent and an uncapped power law of wealth is sheer random luck.
Okay, so if the math shows it's mostly luck, why are we so intensely obsessed with merit? I mean, it makes me think of meritocracy like a rigged carnival game.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
You know those games with the basketball hoops bent into ovals? If you happen to throw the ball just right and win the giant stuffed bear, you walk away thinking you're this athletic genius with a great throwing arm. You're completely blind to the fact that the game was fundamentally tilted in your favor.
What's fascinating here is how the philosopher Michael Sandel diagnoses that exact psychological blind spot. In his book, The Tyranny of Merit, Sandel argues that focusing so intensely on merit allows society to just completely ignore the structural role of luck.
It's convenient.
Extremely convenient, because by doing that, the system shifts the entire blame for systemic inequality directly onto the individual's shoulders.
Sandel writes about how this mindset violently stratifies society into winners and losers, and the psychological fallout from those labels is just devastating.
It really is, because the system tells the winners that their success is entirely their own doing. Sandel notes that they develop extreme hubris. They genuinely believe their affluence is a sign of moral virtue, that they're rich simply because they're inherently better.
Or smarter, or just worked harder.
Exactly. And on the flip side, The losers in this system suffer intense humiliation, because if the system is perfectly fair and based on merit, failing to get wealthy means you have absolutely no one to blame but yourself.
A big part of that humiliation comes from what Sandel calls credentialism. This really jumped out from the source material. We've reached a point where a 4-year college degree is essentially a prerequisite for basic human dignity.
Yeah, it's no longer just about learning a skill, it's a strict sorting mechanism.
Right. And it creates a reality where we actively devalue the working class, the very people who physically keep society functioning.
And Sandel argues this credentialism is fueling a massive populist backlash globally.
Ugh.
People are fundamentally exhausted by a system that denies them respect simply because they didn't, navigate an elite university pipeline.
So if pure merit is largely a myth and luck plays this massive role, we have to look at the mechanics of the people who actually capture the extreme ends of that wealth. We need to pivot from the philosophy of success to the actual machinery used by the world's richest men.
Which means we have to talk about Warren Buffett.
Yes, Warren Buffett. Because for decades, the public narrative has been that Buffett just possesses this mystical, unteachable instinct for picking the perfect stock.
But the sources show a very different reality. Buffett's early strategy, which he learned from Benjamin Graham, was notoriously called cigar butt investing.
Cigar butt.
Yeah, you look for a discarded, beaten-down company priced below its liquidation value. It's literally like finding a discarded cigar on the street that has just one good puff left in it. You buy it dirt cheap, take the puff, and throw it away.
But he didn't stick with that. Influenced by Charlie Munger, he evolved. He stopped digging through the trash and started buying what he calls compounders, like Apple and Coca-Cola. But the Sparkline Capital research in our stack really pulls the curtain back on this.
They took decades of Buffett's track record and ran it through advanced mathematical factor models. Yeah. And the findings demystify the magic entirely.
They really do.
The research shows that 87% of Buffett's massive outperformance is not mystical stock-picking genius. It's systematically explained by factor exposures. Specifically, his portfolio mechanically favors stocks that rank high in two categories: intangible value and quality.
Let's break down those terms so they aren't just financial jargon. What does quality actually mean mathematically?
In a factor model, quality means a company has a pristine balance sheet, low debt, incredibly consistent cash flows, and a high return on the equity they reinvest. It's not a feeling, it's a strict mathematical filter.
Okay, and intangible value.
That's arguably even more powerful. These are assets you cannot physically touch. Patents, network effects, and above all, brand equity.
That concept of brand equity perfectly sets up the anecdote in our sources about Bernard Arnault, the CEO of LVMH, world's second richest man.
Right, thing on the day, yeah.
Right. So the story goes, Arnault takes his first trip to New York in the 1970s. He gets into a taxi and asks the driver, do you know the French president?
And the cab driver responds, no, I don't know the French president, but I know Christian Dior.
And that specific conversation rewired Arnault's entire understanding of business. He realized that true wealth wouldn't come from manufacturing textiles, it would come from controlling desire. Brand equity. He bought Dior and built a ruthless empire of 80 luxury brands.
Entirely around the perception of luxury.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I have to push back on this. If 87% of Buffett's success is just a systematic formula of buying quality and intangible value, why isn't everyone a billionaire?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
Seriously, if it's just math, why is the result so rare?
Because comprehending the system conceptually is entirely different from surviving it psychologically. The secret ingredient isn't magic, it's discipline.
Meaning what exactly?
The psychological fortitude to hold on to these assets through decades of terrifying market drawdowns. When the market crashes by 50%, the average investor panics and sells. Buffett simply does nothing.
So building the fortune requires discipline and recognizing brand equity, but keeping it requires an entirely different hidden rule book that ordinary workers don't have access to.
And the leaked ProPublica secret IRS files provide the raw data for this hidden rulebook. The files expose the tax returns of thousands of the nation's wealthiest people.
And the numbers are staggering.
Between 2014 and 2018, Warren Buffett's wealth grew by $24.3 billion. Over that same period, he paid $23.7 million in total taxes. That is a true tax rate of 0.1%.
And Jeff Bezos, like we said at the start, paid zero federal income tax in 2007 and 2011, and even claimed a child tax credit. Let's contrast this with the average American household.
The people listening right now.
Right. You earn about $70,000 a year, rely on W-2 wages, and pay roughly a 14% tax rate. The entire system relentlessly taxes wages, but the ultra-wealthy don't rely on wages. They rely on buy, borrow, die.
Let's walk through the mechanics of buy, borrow, die. If you're Jeff Bezos, taking a massive salary is foolish because salaries are taxed at nearly 40%. Instead, you keep your vast wealth entirely in company stock.
But eventually you need cash to buy a super yacht or an estate.
Exactly. But you don't sell the stock to get the cash, because selling triggers a capital gains tax. Instead, you walk into a major bank and take out a low-interest line of credit, using your massive stock holdings as collateral.
It's essentially like having a magical credit card where the bill never comes due. Imagine going to a bank and instead of showing a paycheck, you just point at your house. And the bank says, great, your house went up in value, here is a credit card. You live off borrowed money, and the bank just accepts your ever-growing house value as a permanent IOU.
This raises an important question. Why does the IRS allow this? Well, the IRS does not classify loans as income. A loan is debt. So no income means no income tax. You borrow money at a 2% interest rate, while your stock portfolio grows at 8%.
You are quite literally getting richer by borrowing money. But what about the die part? Someone has to pay the piper eventually, right?
Not necessarily. When the billionaire passes away, the assets pass to their heirs. The tax code allows for a step up in basis. All those untaxed gains from the original purchase price are essentially wiped out. The heirs inherit the stock at current market value, legally erasing the capital gains tax entirely.
And this wasn't an accident. The system got built this way.
The structural foundation was laid in a 1920s Supreme Court ruling, Eisner v. Macomber. It established a strict distinction between realized and unrealized gains. You can only tax realized income cash proceeds from a sale. The simple on-paper growth of an asset, the unrealized gain, cannot be taxed. That single precedent insulated the wealth of the modern billionaire class.
And these tax loopholes aren't just saving billionaires money. They're structurally altering who holds ultimate power in our society, creating a new era of monopolies. We're looking at the rise of the modern tech titans.
Yeah, the 7 tech titans, Bezos, Musk, Zuckerberg, and so on, they now control roughly a third of the S&P 500's total market value.
Which is insane. To find a historical parallel, you have to look back to the 19th century Gilded Age. Rockefeller, Vanderbilt. Henry George actually warned about this back in 1883. He wrote that monstrous fortunes necessarily imply the loss of government control by the people.
Because when wealth reaches a certain mass, it generates its own gravity, bending the political system to its will. The sociologists in our sources dubbed today's equivalent the Brawligarchs. They operate on a Nietzschean philosophy.
The Nietzschean concept of the Übermensch, right? The Superman.
Exactly. They view themselves as visionary creators operating above the conventional morality of the herd. They believe democratic limits, regulations, and social norms just hold back their genius. They desire a structure with absolutely zero limits on their power.
Now, just to be super clear here, when we discuss the political influence of these billionaires and proposals for wealth taxes, we have to look at the data. They heavily court and influence both left-wing and right-wing politicians.
Yeah, their lobbying spans the entire political spectrum.
Right. And we are neutrally reporting on the structural shifts detailed in our sources here. We aren't endorsing any political side or specific tax reform. We're just trying to impart the data showing how extreme wealth translates into societal power.
And historically, when wealth concentrates this much, society demands massive structural changes. The original Gilded Age excesses required the 17th Amendment, forcing the direct election of senators and robust antitrust laws to break up monopolies. The question is whether we have the tools to rebalance today.
We've zoomed way out here, from the math of luck to Buffett's factor models, the buy, borrow, die tax machinery, and the Gilded Age. But let's bring it right back down to the individual listener. How do these massive structures shape your everyday reality?
For that, we turn to Michael P.K. Okirefo's academic paper on the autobiographical self. He builds on C. Wright Mill's concept of the sociological imagination.
Explain how that works in practice.
It's the ability to see the connection between your personal troubles and public issues. If you're stressed about bills, the instinct is to blame yourself. But the sociological imagination teaches that your personal financial anxiety is intimately tied to the macroeconomic structures we've been discussing.
Okirefo gives a brilliant example of how society constructs labels that dictate our lives. He points out that if a white UN worker moves to Vienna, society labels them an expat. But if a highly skilled African professional moves to that exact same city, society labels them a migrant.
The physical action is identical, but the label is dictated entirely by global power structures. That label determines how desirable you are, the respect you receive, and it dictates how you view your own worth.
So what does this all mean? When you connect Okerefo's paper back to Sandel's book, the losers of the meritocracy and the socially constructed migrants are both victims of labels created by the very power structures that benefit the billionaires we just discussed.
This is driving a push for a global sociology, incorporating Southern standpoints. Western hegemony has a long history of ignoring thinkers outside its power structure, like the 14th century Islamic scholar Ibn Khaldun.
Wait, didn't he predate Western sociology?
By centuries, he laid foundational concepts long before Auguste Comte was even born. Yet his contributions are sidelined simply because of where he was from. Power structures dictate tax law, but they also dictate who is recognized as a genius and who is culturally validated.
It's wild to look at the massive scope of what we've unpacked today. We deconstructed the myth of pure merit versus luck. We decoded the systemic investing discipline of Buffett, exposed the hidden buy, borrow, die tax machinery of the new Gilded Age, and ultimately revealed how these massive structural forces write the script of our personal biographies.
If you take away one insight, it's that your life is navigating a vast, pre-existing architecture. Understanding that architecture is the first step to freeing yourself from the guilt or hubris it imposes on you.
Which brings us to a final provocative thought for you to mull over. Based on Michael Sandel's call for a civic definition of the common good. If the game of wealth involves a massive amount of luck, hidden tax systems, and arbitrary socially constructed labels, what would happen if you completely decoupled your own sense of self-worth from your economic output?
It's a huge question.
What would your life in our society look like if true merit was judged not by the degrees on your wall or the money in your bank, but solely by how you care for your community? Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.